Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Tech Talk, a show where we talk about various topics that we choose. We usually deep dive into one of the topic of our choosing every week. This week is a little bit different. We're going to talk about how to create or how to start a podcast. Usually, our topics are a little bit technically focused, but today, there is a lot of technical aspect on starting a podcast as well. We're going to cover all of that, but also because we have been podcasting for some time now, we have over 20 episodes with a number of notable guests. So I think this is a good time for us to share our experience on how we created, how we started, and how you guys can benefit from knowing how the knowledge of how to create a podcast. So that's our topic today. Very excited to talk about it because it's our experience, what we have gone through, our journey for the past, this year and last year when we started. So yeah, hopefully you guys will enjoy and get a lot of information out of our talk. And who knows, maybe we'll inspire one of you guys to start your own podcast.
Yes, Rinat, thank you so much for the introduction again, as always. And I think it's a very interesting topic, podcast, especially in the pandemic. A lot of people are now stuck at home and they feel like they want to talk about some things. And they are also listening to a lot of podcasts and they are thinking, okay, how do I start a podcast of my own? And I think it's useful to share that journey as well because I think as we are doing with the rest of the topics, we are trying to encourage people to explore more about those things. And podcast is, I think, again a very great way to communicate ideas and share experiences. So I think it's a really wonderful topic. And as you said, there are a lot of technical aspects involved. So we'll discuss that during our show today.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things to think about is, one of the reasons why we started is obviously we both have full-time jobs and, then we have a lot of other responsibilities. So we didn't want to take on a project which will take on a lot of time or effort. So if you wanted to do like a, I don't know, a YouTube video channel of how to do things, that actually takes a lot of effort in terms of editing the video and scripting it. You need to prepare a lot more to know exactly what you're going to talk about, what you're going to demonstrate. Podcast is relatively easy in that sense because you are talking about something that you're already knowledgeable, you're already an expert in. For example, the job that you do, obviously you have years of experience on that. So and podcast is something where you can just be relaxed and talk about it. So that's the benefit of podcasts, that you don't have to script it, you don't have to plan it too much. You just share your knowledge as a relaxed conversation. So that's one of the reasons why it was appealing to me. But
And
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
go on.
interestingly, we haven't scripted this show as well. So we are just going to talk about our experience, and that actually shows when you're listening to the show because sometimes when you script a lot of times, what happens is that your attention goes away. You have to look at the script and then ask the questions, and sometimes it feels like an interrogation, etc. So if you have a casual conversation, you have jokes, it feels lighter, and people are more inclined to listen to such shows.
Yes, absolutely. That's the benefit of podcast, and yeah, that's one of the reasons why we chose it. So yeah, Amit, why don't you start us off with like how what are the main things that we need when someone thinks about starting their own podcast?
Well, I think first they need to understand what a podcast is. I mean, podcast has two elements in it. The word itself, pod and cast. Cast comes from broadcast, so broadcast is nothing but radio. So radio broadcast, so television broadcast, and then this cast. Cast comes from there, and pod basically got popularized by iPod. A lot of people were listening to music over their iPods, and now how do you connect to those listeners and that audience? So the concept of podcast came. So basically, audio shows for people that they could listen like every week, like a radio show that people used to listen. But now you can access this show over the internet. So it's now a digital show. So that's how it got very popular. Initially, I mean, it was all about a few people talking about just like a radio show, and slowly it started gaining momentum, and a lot of people saw the use and benefit of starting their own podcast, and they got onto the bandwagon. And we also went through the similar process. Now, in order for you to start a podcast, you need to understand that we are recording audio. In our case, we record a video as well, and then what we do is we extract the audio from the video, we process the audio, and then we publish it. So you need to understand that podcast is basically recording audio. We are recording the audio of people talking or yourself talking to the camera, or to a mic. Now, in our case, we record the video as well and we publish that to YouTube. And then what we do is we extract the audio from the video file, do some processing, and then we publish it. So that's our process. But in essence, a podcast is all about audio. So you first need to record the audio. Now, in order for you to record an audio, you need a good quality mic. And if you have a headset like the one that I'm wearing, if you're watching this show on YouTube, then you can see that I'm wearing a headset with a mic. Now, this gives me good clarity. And it's very cheap. It's a Microsoft headset. It doesn't cost that much. It's about 20 to 30 pounds. You can buy it from Amazon or even the Microsoft store. And the main advantage is it's not a Bluetooth. Now, the reason it's good because it's not Bluetooth is because there is no latency. It means there is no delay between what you are saying and what's getting recorded. So everything gets recorded immediately in high quality. And I'm not using the 3.5 mm, the headphone jack or the jack that you use normally to record audios. So it means it's digital audio, and it means you can process it digitally instantly once it's recorded. So I think that's the key thing. You need a good quality mic, or mic with a headset is again beneficial. Then in order for you to record the audio, you need a piece of software. So in our case, we record the video over Zoom, and we also record the video over OBS Studio. And so we have two different copies of the same recording. And once we record the video, what we then do is we extract the audio from it using Audacity. Audacity is an open source tool, and OBS Studio is also an open source tool. Both are open source. Both are very popular with the podcasting community, and not just for podcasting but also for streaming. So if you're interested in video game streaming, etc. So it's very important, and it's free. So that's the biggest advantage. You don't have to pay a license. So once you have the software, what can you do with it? You have to enhance the voice. You have to get rid of any noise in the recording, because a lot of times while recording ourselves, we have observed that you will get noise like ambient noise. So suppose you're recording in a computer, the fan starts running at a very high speed because it's recording video, even audio. So that means the computer processing has increased, the fan is running, and that fan can cause a noise that will come as a background noise in your recording. So you need to get rid of that. So you apply some noise reduction filters, and then you want to enhance the voice, because a lot of times what happens is if two people are recording remotely, especially Rinat and me, we are at two different locations and we are recording remotely. So that means that we have to make sure that when we finally process the audio, our pitch is same. The volume, the highest volume and the lowest volume is in the same range. It should not exceed quite a lot. So we try to do that, and then we apply some other noise reduction filters and some other filters, and we can detail that in the show notes. So that'll help you guys to understand. And then the final bit, so this is the equipment. You need a good quality mic, you need a good software. Of course, in order for you to run the software, you need a laptop or a PC. And the final thing is, where do you publish the audio file? Now, we need to understand that there are free offerings, but in order for you to start a good quality podcast, you need to pay. And the reason you need to pay is because starting a podcast means that you are now uploading audio file. Audio files are generally bigger than text files. So suppose you have a text of 1000 words or 2000 words. It'll be about 100 KB, maximum 1 MB with images, etc. But an audio file which is 1 hour long will normally be about 50 MB to about 100 MB, depending upon the quality in which you record. So now that means if your audio file is getting downloaded by 1000 people, because whenever they're listening to the file, they're actually downloading it to their system. It could be their phone, it could be their computer, it could be their tablet, any device. So basically they are requesting the file to be sent to their device. That's a download. Even though it's streaming, you're still downloading information. That information could be anywhere from 50 to 100 MB. Multiply that with 1000 people, that's about 50 MB into 1000, that's 50,000 MB. That's about 50 GB. 50 approximately 50 GB with just 1000 people listening to your podcast. That's a lot of data transmission. And imagine your internet provider doesn't have unlimited plans, etc. And if you're recording so much data, so they normally charge you for all this bandwidth. So similarly, content hosting providers, they have to now think about this download bandwidth, and that's why they charge you, so that you don't have any restrictions in how much you can publish and what you can publish and the length of the episode. So once you have all this, and if you're recording, by the way, like us, what we are doing, you also need a good quality camera so that you can see us in good resolution. And we use a ring light so that we get good lighting on our face. And we are not using a very high-end professional stuff. These are just regular stuff that you can order from Amazon, very cheap. And then you can start podcasting. Of course, when you go
Yeah.
to a professional level, then I think you need to invest a bit more, but in order for you to start, these are the bare minimum. A 20 to 30 pound headset, a laptop that you already have, two free and open source softwares, and the only thing that you would need to pay for is your podcast hosting platform. So yeah, those are the things that you need to start.
Absolutely, yes. No, I mean, yeah, I was just listening to you and I was thinking, like, how can we categorize it? So there are like physical components that you need. One is the laptop that usually come integrated with a webcam, or you can choose to buy a webcam, a separate webcam. So that, and then the headset or a microphone. I mean, if you're watching me in YouTube, you see that Amit is wearing a headset. I'm not. I'm actually using the microphone that is available in the webcam that I have. That's also possible. I have a separate webcam with microphone. Um, but yeah, these are the physical components. And then the software components are the software to record, which comes with Zoom. Zoom, you can record it in Zoom, but also you can record it in the free open source software OBS. Um, so as Amit mentioned, we record on both tools because as a fail-safe, if one of them for whatever reason doesn't work, or if I forget, we have another one as a backup. So and this did happen. Even just last week, I actually forgot to record on my side, but thankfully it was recorded on Amit's side. So it's important to have a fail-safe. So yeah, I mean, all of these things are what you need to, software and hardware-wise, what you need to start a podcast. So what I wanna emphasize is that yes, as Amit said, that it can very quickly add up to a lot of bandwidth. So it is recommended that you go to a dedicated podcast host, and get a paid plan, but you don't it's not an absolute necessity. So if you are on a budget and just looking to start, you can start without. There are some free plans that are available from various podcast hosting sites as well. So you could, what Amit is, I think what we are saying not to do is to not host it from your website, because websites are, website hosting platforms like GoDaddy or HostGators, they are not designed to have such high bandwidth in such short time for audio streaming. But there are like dedicated podcast hosting platforms. They are prepared for it, and that's what they do. So what we would strongly recommend is go to one of those hosting platforms, but they would provide some free service as well, obviously with some limitations. Maybe you want to start with that, and then as your podcast grows, as you see, you can actually put in the time and effort that's required every week, or however the frequency is you think for your podcast. Once you think you can do that, then of course, once there is any tangible return of what you're looking for, then you can potentially look for a paid plan. But you can actually start it on a very low budget with the things you probably already have on lying around in your home, webcam, microphones, etc. So yeah, definitely would encourage viewers to think about it, and it's not too time consuming, it's not too difficult, and all it takes is for you to start. You don't have to start it in a good professional level podcast. We're not, we're just two people talking, and thankfully, you guys find value in our conversations, so you're listening in. And I'm sure that whatever you have to talk about, from your job experience or your life experience, a lot of people will find value in it. So yes, definitely urge and encourage you guys to look it up and see if you can start one.
So the other thing I want to mention is that whenever we talk about uh, podcast hosting, it's not publishing the audio file to Spotify or Apple Podcast. So it's like your website. You host a website, say at GoDaddy or any other platform, and then you have a domain name, say google.com. But you're not going to godaddy.com. You're going to google.com. Even the content, even though the content is hosted on GoDaddy. So similarly, when you are talking about a podcast, the content is hosted somewhere, but you access the content through Spotify, through Apple Podcast, through Amazon Podcast, Google Podcast, and the various other things. Now, there is a difference. So, content hosting, one place where all the content is hosted with all the artwork, with all the notes, everything. And the next thing is the directories. So, Apple Podcast is a directory, Spotify is a directory, and then you have Google Podcast, that is a directory. And what this means is that whenever you publish a podcast, there is something called as a RSS feed. We'll put down a link as to what RSS feed is, but in essence, it's basically a subscription feed. So you just go to Apple Podcasts and you say, I'm hosting a new podcast, and this is where you can find about my podcast with all the details, where the audio file is, what are the show notes. And Apple will subscribe to that feed. The moment Apple subscribes, it means whenever there is a new episode published on our content hosting platform, Apple will get a notification saying a new episode has come out, and Apple will then display it in its listing. And same thing Spotify does, same thing Google Podcast does. Now the content hosting platforms, they have become very intelligent, so they let you auto publish to these directories. The biggest directory on the planet right now is Apple Podcast. So if you publish it on Apple Podcast, more or less it will get published across all the small directories. But for Spotify, Google Podcast, and Amazon, they're the other big players in the podcast directories. You will have to publish, and you will have to tell them about your feed. It is like telling a search engine that my website exists. So Apple Podcasts will not know if your podcast exists. You have to tell them, and you have to tell them where to find the content. So I think that is very important.
Yes, absolutely. Then that is one of the technical bits, isn't it? I mean, so yeah, as Amit was explaining, when you host a podcast, you host it to a dedicated hosting platform. That's where the audio file actually resides, and then you connect or integrate your podcast hosting site with whichever or all of the podcast podcast platforms that you want it to be published, for example Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. So we publish our podcast in all of them. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Ghana, and various other uh, podcast websites. But we don't individually upload our audio to all of these. We upload our audio to one place, which is our podcast hosting website. Captivate is the one we use. We have had good service from them, so I would recommend it. But again, I haven't used any other ones, so I don't have any frame of reference. Please do your due diligence and research before choosing one. But yeah, Captivate is something I'm quite happy with. I'm sure Amit also has positive things to say about them. We basically integrated. Captivate has this, has this interface where you can integrate Captivate's, audio content with all other big networks of podcasts like Apple Podcast, Spotify, etc. So whenever we upload our audio, now that it is all connected and integrated, whenever we upload our podcast to one place, which is Captivate, and then Captivate, through its integration, passes all of these new episodes into all the destinations, which are Apple Podcast or Ghana uh, or any other podcast platform. So that's the thing. That's one of the things that wasn't clear to me before I started podcasting, but now it is clear, and now I also understand the reasoning behind it, as Amit explained in the beginning of the talk. 1,000 people listening in for a 50 meg podcast size would very quickly become quite a lot of bandwidth. So you want one hosting website which is able to provide that kind of dedicated service. So yeah, I mean, these are all the components we talked about, and also we just talked about how it all, you know, goes about in terms of uploading and publishing. What else are there that we could, I mean, so how about the drawings and artworks that we have to create to go alongside with the video and even audio?
So, yeah, Renat, I think you raised a very good point, the artwork. So we have actually two artwork. One is for the show and we use a PowerPoint, simple PowerPoint presentation, which we have built by ourselves using images that are not copyright protected. So you need to make sure that your images are not copyright protected and it's not violating any copyrights. So make sure that you download or use images that are free to use and has no copyright um, policy on it. And the next thing that you want to make sure is you have an episode artwork. So the episode artwork is either you can have it repetitive or you can have it changed daily. So in our case, we just have a very simple artwork. We just have the photos of ourselves and then the name of the episode, and that's about it. So that's the artwork, but then you need to also have show notes where you give a brief summary of what the show is about, so your audience, when they are scanning through the show, they can quickly see what this episode is about and they can decide whether they want to listen to it or not. So those are the two main things. The other thing is SEO tags, etc. So as Rinat mentioned, we use Captivate and Captivate generates SEO tags. So if you want to search for our podcast or using a specific term, then that SEO tag helps. So these are the three essential things. So you have the artwork, you have the show notes, and you have the SEO tags. The last bit, if you want to do it, because it takes a lot of effort, is the transcription. So we recently did a podcast on accessibility, and one of the requirements by the host was that we publish a transcript. And I think it was a very good ask, and we really appreciated that he had requested for that particular feature. So most of the podcasts also allow you to have a transcript, and basically what a transcript is nothing but a text version of the podcast. So if anyone who doesn't want to listen to an audio because they have low hearing or they don't have enough time and they want to quickly skim through the episode, they can go through the transcript. And transcript is again very useful, and the podcast hosting platforms provide you with a format on how to publish. Now for transcript, it's a bit tricky. So the fastest way to do it is, if you have a Office 365 subscription, then on Word, Office 365 Online and Word Online, you can upload the audio file and Microsoft will convert that audio file into a transcript file with the text, timestamp, everything. It'll do it automatically. I'll share a link to that how that is done in our podcast so people can benefit from it. It's something, if you're already paying for Office 365 subscription, I think it's a very useful way to get your audio transcribed, and it's one of the cheapest way to do it, because if you go anywhere else you'll have to pay a lot of money, and this is like included as part of Office 365 subscription. So I think those are the couple of things that you need to do: artwork, show notes, tags, transcription. So once you have that ready, you publish your podcast. And when you're setting up the podcast initially, you set up the directory. So you tell Spotify where your podcast is hosted. You tell Apple where your podcast is hosted. You tell Google where your podcast is hosted. So these are the directories, and you tell them, okay, this is where my file is located. Whenever something gets published, show it on your platform. Now, bear in mind, whenever we publish an episode, sometimes it might take a few seconds to few minutes to few hours, depending upon how frequently they update their platform. So, suppose you publish today, your episode may come tomorrow on Apple Podcast because it takes a bit of time. And they also try to do some verification when you're setting it up. So, bear that in mind as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, yeah, when with the transcription part, obviously, I mean, you handled it when we had to go through it. But no, I'm actually amazed to see, knowing how you did it. That's actually a really good piece of information, even for future. I mean, even we might want to transcribe all our podcasts if it is that straightforward. And there are many other benefits. There are many other ways to use this kind of transcription. Maybe you have an audio conversation from somewhere, and you would like it to be written down to take notes, etc. This is an actual really nice feature that Microsoft Office 365 has, and it can be used in many different ways, and that's really good to know. Another thing I wanted to talk about is, you were talking about royalty-free images. Yes, absolutely. It's very important that any image or video you use on any of your podcasts or any content, you want to make sure that it's royalty-free. Or if you for whatever reason have to use someone else's content, then you need to get written permission for it. But there are a lot of websites. There are very few. There are very quite a few good websites that actually provides royalty-free images and videos for free. And one of the ones I use is pixabay.com. We can include a few more links to a few others that does it. And you literally don't even have to sign up in some of these websites. You just literally go and download royalty-free, high-quality images of various topics. They're all categorized, and you can search it within their website. Very helpful. Pixabay.com is one of the ones that I use. There are quite a few of them. Google it for free, royalty-free images. I'm sure they will come up. So yeah, don't get deterred by all of these requirements. They are all available for free on the
I
internet.
Yeah, I use Unsplash, and Unsplash is again free. But I think the best way to do it is just go to Office 365 or Microsoft PowerPoint and just use your own photos and use some other artwork and you design it yourself. So that way you are free from any restrictions. I think that's the easiest and cheapest way to do it. It's a lot of, I mean, it's very hassle-free as well. So I think, yeah. So once you have the recording and then everything, then I think you're good to go. But one more thing is, whenever you're recording a podcast, you need to understand the topic that you're talking about. And if you're inviting guests, you need to make sure that you share a link to them in order for them to come on your show and then record. Zoom, we have found it to be the most convenient because you can record the video as well, and you can have the audio and video file separately recorded. If you use Teams or Google Meets, then it doesn't give you all those features that Zoom does. So we are currently on a paid plan of Zoom. Zoom, normally it's free if two people are talking. So me and Rinat, when we are talking, Zoom is free. But if you have to invite a guest, then it is free only for the first 40 minutes, and after that we have to pay for it. So we decided, okay, because we are planning to have more guests on the show, that we will get a subscription. Otherwise, there are other um, paid options like Zencaster and other things, which are a bit tricky to use, but I think they are very popular as well. So yeah, or you can record it on your phone and then just get the file and then do the processing on it. So I think those are some of the ways where you can actually record the show. But when you're recording the show, make sure you have very less ambient noise, the fan noise, etc., because that will create a lot of background noise when someone is talking. In some of our shows, earlier shows, we had that issue. So if you go back, you can hear that.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But there one thing to emphasize here as well, that when we started, we started, recording ourselves in Zoom. We were using Zoom as our meeting platform, and because it was just the two of us talking, we didn't actually need to pay for a Zoom subscription. So for quite a few months on starting, we were not paying anything for any kind of service there. So yeah, don't get deterred thinking that, oh, that's another extra cost. You only have to think about it when you have an additional guest. And if you are just one person, I mean, our the way our podcast is set up is that Amit and I both talk, because we are both experienced in our topics, and we enjoy doing it this way. But you might want to start a podcast on your own, without needing the help from anyone else. And if it is just yourself, then even when you have a guest, you don't have to get a paid Zoom license. So yeah, I mean, for first good few months, we didn't have to incur this cost. Only when we thought that, okay, we do want a few guests, and we had a lineup, and we obviously wouldn't want to miss out on having guest speakers and share their wealth of knowledge with you guys. And it was definitely worth it for us to pay for a Zoom subscription. But it definitely isn't a mandatory cost, so keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think yes, it's definitely not a mandatory cost. I think the only expense that we incurred initially was on the podcast hosting platform. That's it. I think that's the only thing we paid for the first 20 episodes. We are currently, I think this is episode 29, and we'll be soon publishing 30 episodes. So 30 episodes roughly translates to 4 episodes per month. So that we are talking about 7 months worth of episodes that we have recorded day in day out. So I think that's a lot of content. So yes, the other thing to bear in mind is when you are recording shows, you need to decide the frequency. We have chosen to do it weekly. Sometimes we um, skip a week if we have episodes in our bank, but normally we try to record every week. And now you decide how much time you want to spend on recording, because bear in mind, once you record the audio or the video, you will have to spend some time on processing, doing the artwork, uh, getting some show notes, some reference URLs, etc. And that requires time. So if you're doing it outside your work, then you need to consider all that time and energy that will go. So decide a frequency so that the audience also gets used to it, because they're used to getting a show every week, then they're expecting that. Otherwise, they will move on to a different show. So you have to bear in mind the frequency as well.
Yes, absolutely. And this is actually a very crucial topic to begin with, because it requires some thought, because it is a commitment from yourself. So you need to actually be fully clear that how much time you want to actually dedicate on this, and how much time will you be regularly be able to, keep free for this project. And if you decide, oh, I'm going to do it every 2 days, and then it would very soon become too much. And also, if it is, even if you're thinking for once every month, maybe that would be too infrequent for a regular audience base. So yeah, I mean, usually most of the podcasts I've seen are weekly, and they are weekly for a reason. But it is a commitment, and even if it is weekly, I mean, you also need to realize that if you can do it weekly, if not, then you could also go bi-weekly. But it's very important to be consistent. Persistence and consistency is the key whenever you're starting any project like that, because it's more the power of habit rather than a power of motivation. You need to do it every week, and then do the video editing every week if you want to add the video component with it. If not, then you still have to edit the audio, and then publish and write the show notes and create the artwork. So there is quite a few hours of work involved every week, and it is a commitment that you want to do. You want to make sure that you can do. But then, we were inspired by a few other talks. One of them was from Scott Hanselman. Amit introduced me to his content, and I thought it was great content, and he made it sound really easy. But then again, we didn't want to just became instantly motivated. We thought about it, and we realized that, okay, you know what, it is possible for us to dedicate 2 or 3 hours every week to record and edit the video, etc. So we took it on, And we thought we could contribute to the society by sharing our knowledge that we've gathered over decades of experience in IT and consultancy, etc. So absolutely, I mean, whatever you're doing, well, no matter how unimportant you think your job is, it is very important. And a lot of people are doing, a lot of people are actually really eager to know what you know from your experience at your job. So it definitely is worth sharing. Definitely, I would strongly urge that to all of our audience. And it is actually as many things we mentioned that is required in podcasts. It's not actually um, that difficult. It only requires 2 or 3 hours of work every week, and sometimes if you have guest speakers in your podcast, it requires even less time because you don't even have to think about a topic. And most of the time, we don't actually really think about topics because we just choose the topics that we genuinely want to talk about. We are interested in these topics, so we actually enjoy talking about these topics without having it to be scripted. So yeah, definitely there is a lot of benefit on starting it, and while there are a few things that you have to do, but they're definitely not um, too much. And within only 2 hours every week, you can have a running podcast very, very quickly.
I think one thing we need to mention is that we actually split the work. So the video gets edited by Rinat, and I work on the audio side, and I also work on the artwork. And that way we make sure that none of us is burdened, and we share the work equally. Video takes a bit more time, but once the video edit is done, I can extract the audio and then apply the filters very quickly. Then I scan the internet for the URLs, the show notes, and then we try to publish it. Also bear in mind that the content hosting platform that we use, Captivate, also has its own website, in the sense that our podcast is available on Captivate as a Captivate website. So we don't have to actually publish it on Spotify. We can actually ask viewers and listeners to come to Captivate and listen to our show. But I think, given how easy it is to use Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, people prefer to listen to shows using those apps. So that's why it's important to get your podcast as widely available as possible. There are some podcast review websites as well, like Podchaser, and you can then make sure that you can publish your podcast there. The other thing to note is that we don't generate any revenue from our podcast at the moment. We have not thought of monetizing it. We are just looking to make sure that our content is delivered to the people, and we are just doing it out of our own interest. So far, we are not generating any revenue, but there are ways to monetize a podcast as well, but currently we are not doing any of that, and that is through audio. Now, that one of the final things that I want to mention before we end this show, I think we have covered a lot of things, is that podcast is the next big thing. Imagine when you are running, imagine when you are driving a car, imagine when you're commuting, you're walking down the station platform. Those times it's very difficult to focus on a video, because you'll have to look at a phone screen, and you cannot drive, you cannot run, you cannot walk, you cannot even change platforms because you're looking at your phone screen. So audio is where it fills that gap, and that is why podcasts have become so popular now, because people want to listen constantly uninterrupted while they are doing things. So suppose you are in your kitchen cooking, you don't want to look at your screen, you want to look while you're cutting the vegetable, but you're listening as well. So that is why podcasts are now becoming very popular. So if you have a good idea, and if you think that you can share something with the people of value, then just go ahead and start your podcast. Don't wait for it, because I'm sure someone will benefit from it.
Yes, absolutely. And despite all the tools that we use that you can pay for, you can start your podcast for free. I mean, start it for free, and then once you get some traction, or once you get in the habit of doing it, then you can probably look at investing on it. But yeah, you can just start without any obstruction. You can start it today without any delay. And usually, what happens is after you published a few episodes, maybe 5 to 10 episodes, then there is a lack of motivation because you were looking. But what I would urge is continue doing it, be consistent, and don't look at returns straight away. It will take some time for the podcast to grow, for people to find it. But once they find it, you know that people are definitely getting value from the knowledge you're sharing. So definitely keep creating content, and start would urge any audience to start your own podcast to share your knowledge to the with the world.
Yes, starting a podcast by yourself is very easy. If you want a professional podcast, of course, there's a whole team behind it. They have recording studios, but people like us, ordinary people, can easily start a podcast. And this is an example. And we wanted to share our experience because now we have done about almost 30 episodes. So it's almost months of our hard work and dedication to this topic. So we wanted to share that knowledge with you.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And once you have published a few episodes and kind of established yourself as a podcast, and established yourself, you and your team as someone who can do these things regularly, you can then reach out to various people in the topic of your podcast and invite them to come and talk in your podcast. That is another whole new level of podcasting, when you have notable people as your guest and you get to talk to them. I mean, through this, we actually got the opportunity to talk to a lot of notable people, which I wouldn't have dreamed of having any conversation without any other means suddenly. But because of this excuse, if you like, we got to reach out to so many people and speak with these people, and understand how they what are their thoughts on a specific topic, and great minds, and how they think, and what their objectives are in future, and what they want to do, and how their journey has been like. So this was really meaningful, and this was a amazing intangible return, I feel, from this podcast, that I got to talk to all of these amazing people who have done a lot of good and a lot of value added to the society by their projects and works, etc. So all of these opportunities will open up, and then if from all the topics that you talk about, then the industry experts will come get to know your podcast, etc., and then they will reach out for you to to do consultancy or various other opportunities. So it is a channel through which you could flourish. You never know what opportunity will come through this. So definitely would urge that if you weren't thinking about it, at least think about it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's all we wanted to share with you. I think this information helps, and it helps you start a podcast, publish it, and we wish you all the best in your podcast. Whenever you want to start, this is the right time to actually start a podcast. There are a lot of social media platform like Clubhouse that are experimenting with just audio only content. So audio is the next big thing. I feel it's quite relevant. There are a lot of research that has been done, and we'll share some insights in the show notes. So yeah, have a look. So thank you so much again for all the time, and thank you as always for listening to our show.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you guys again next week.